Hi guys, welcome back to Read With Me. So today we'll be reading the chapter 1 of Luminous by jeidafei. Let's get right into it. The Ice Pillory. In Latakia, the saying went that there were 2 days a chap would dread the most in his life. The first was the day his wife gave birth. The second, yet not no less feared, was the day the baby opened its eyes and they were glowing green. In the town of Crosset, only one man alive had lived that terrifying tale. His name was Meya Hild, the farmer. Once sure his wife and the baby would live, Farmer Hild went about his business as usual. Like the stoic chap he was, he had never sought an explanation as to why his seed had produced the only green eye in Crosset in this generation. Nor did he once voice his fears regarding the endless misfortune green-eyed children were known to condemn people in their vicinity to. He simply worked the fields dawn till dusk, 6 days a week, to feed the wee baby and her three elder siblings. He made love to his wife every weekend. She went on to bear him three more children, prompting Farmer Hilt to work even harder. He considered his life normal, save the occasional abnormal days that came with raising a lass with glowing green eyes. One such day started off, ordinarily in mid-April, 7 years after the Crosset famine. Farmer Hild stood before the clerk's desk in Crosset Castle's record hall, flanked by his best friend Draken Armorheim, also a farmer. They had been queuing outside the town gate for 3 hours in the tender spring sun for their turn with the clerk. All the while, castle guards standing sentinel while whispering to each other out of the corner of their mouths. Castle workers passing by nudged each other and threw furtive glances at Miriam and Draken, gossiping behind their hand. Miriam could read their lips without even looking. The green eyes father. That's him, they said. He prayed to Keon for another son. That's why Freda cursed him. Have you seen those cursed eyes? Simply monstrous. Yada yada yada. Draken himself was also the butt of many local joke. You know what they say. Don't choose Draken Armorheim to watch your sheep. He had fat little Lord Hadrian on a leash, and he let the boy get away. Miriam and Draken tried not to think that was the reason they were such good friends. The young clerk at last seemed too beleaguered to care. His long golden ponytail was lank with sweat. His greyish green silk cloak was bundled up and wedged to his chair to cushion his spine. With one hand he propped up his heavy head, with the other he jotted down the date and time in his enormous ledger. Name and business, whichever of you will go first. Draken nudged Miriam's shoulder, and Miriam edged a half step forth. Miriam Hild, sir. I would like to update my family registry. My son Myron's joined a guild and he will leave the house next week. Miriam pulled a folded piece of parchment out of his trouser pocket and smoothed it out on the clerk's wooden desk. His son's letter of apprenticeship from a master in the blacksmith guild. The clerk perked up. He stared up at Miriam as if he had passed the most brazen round of wind in Lord Crosset's court. Ink dripped from the tip of his aloof peacock quill. What's your name again? Miriam Hill, sir. Miriam Hild, as in the father of Meya Hild? I do have 6 other children. Miriam refrained from rolling his eyes with much difficulty. For Freda's sake, what was the problem with these people? He had produced 6 perfectly mundane children, and yet they still wouldn't stop pointing at that one with glowing green eyes. Miriam heaved a heavy sigh, grinning through his grimace. Yes, sir, unfortunately, he offered a joke. The clerk raised his eyebrows, puckered his lips, and dipped a few dramatic nods, then flourished his hand at his ledger. And you are here to update your family registry? Yes, sir. I would like to move out my son Myron and recalculate my taxes. Miriam agreed with enthusiasm. With luck, he could hurry back and catch up on some last minute work in the fields without further discussions of his infamous offspring. The clerk gawked at him for a tantalizing moment longer, then shook his head. He recorded Miriam's testament in beautiful connecting letters, a grin of amusement on his lips. Forgive my surprise, my dear chap. I didn't expect to see a man here doing his taxes while his daughter's on trial. You must really despise the lass. He picked up Myron's letter and examined it for signs of tampering. Now it was Myron's turn to freeze. He shot a quick glance at Draken. He seemed just as confused, then whirled back, gripped the table edge with both hands. Sir? My daughter. Which one? What for? The clerk looked up for the first time. His expression morphed from derision to genuine concern. Quill and letter fell from his hands onto polished wood as he stared wide-eyed. Goodly, Freda, you haven't heard? Suddenly, hurried footsteps bounded on the flagstones towards them, overtaken by a strident scream. Farmer Hild! Where's Farmer Hild? A red-faced lass sprinted up the snaking line, black ponytail swinging, darting eyes scanning every moustached face. All the men shook their heads. At long last, her sweaty hands clasped around Miriam's hairy arm. The ice! They are putting her in the ice, she gasped out between heavy breaths, clutching a stitch in her side. What ice? Who? What are you talking about, Jazia? Draken demanded. Jazia's blue eyes were wide with horror. Meya, they're putting her in the ice pillory. Meya! Everything around Miriam seemed to have ceased to exist. Barely feeling his feet, he dashed back out of the castle gate. Draken and Jizya hurried along in his wake. The trench was a strip of barren land beside the castle's deep water moat, its sunken pit filled by a crowd of spectators by the time Miriam, Draken, and Jizya arrived. The empty gallows towered above like a flag, marking the dip of the trench. The stench cloud from the mount of fermenting waste beside the castle's wall floated across the moat, hanging yellow over the bobbing heads of what looked to be the whole town's busybodies. Amidst the jostling, jeering, fist-shaking peasants, Miriam caught sight of a familiar, portly man, Jason Bozell, the merchant. He was teetering about on tiptoes, craning his neck to see. Dad, Jizya yelled as they hurtled in. The plump man whirled around, then scampered towards them. Finally, where in the three lands have you been? Jason grabbed Miriam's shoulder and ushered him forth. Damn warden's not taking new coins. Hurry! Jason plunged into the crowd and bullet through, dragging Miriam and Draken behind him. No sooner had the three men emerged to the front than their feet skidded to a lurching halt, as if wrenched back by taut chains knotted to a stake. Beside the gallows base, surrounded by torture devices, wooden and metal, pebbles and remnants of a rotten produce, two youngsters were on their knees, one a boy and the other a girl, both not a day above 17. Pebbles, oozing tomatoes, and moldy potatoes pelted them as they sat slumped with their arms stretched taut, hanging by their wrists from pillories hanging above their heads. The girl's pillory, instead of wood, was made of a singular block of clear bluish ice, the infamous ice pillory of Crozet. Diki, Mia! Draken cried. Before Miriam could even budge, he had already sprinted towards his only son. Diki whipped around at the sound of his father's voice. He was a stocky lad with a long, freckled face, topped with a crop of shiny hay-colored hair. He creaked an apologetic smile as the warden, with a bushy mustache, waddled in to block Draken's path with his truncheon. Holding one arm over his forehead to shield his skull from the barrage of rocks and rotten vegetables, the ale-bellied man yelled, "One more stinking tomato while I'm down here, and there will be fry to pay." Seeing the truncheon waving high in the air, one by one the restless villagers behaved. Albeit with a lot of grumbling, Miriam turned to the lass in the ice pillory, his fourth yet most troublesome offspring, Mia. The girl looked ordinary enough, with her red gold hair in two fraying braids that served to soak up the dripping ice in place of her threadbare woolen dress. A smatter of freckles paraded across the flat terrain where the bridge of her nose should be. Her eyes, however, were a vivid, unnatural green that gave out an eerie glow of their own, like a cat's eyes at night, and betrayed a similar lack of emotions as she stared back at him. "What in the three lands have you done this time?" Miriam said coldly. "There you are, Hild." A barking voice cut across before Meya could reply. Miriam spun around. The man's bald head glittered above a sea of brown hair as he pushed his way to the front with a menace in each clump. His sun-tanned skin was stretched taut over bulging muscles scored by popping veins. "Been wanting to have a chat about what your green-eyed devil did to my boy here." The man jerked a thumb towards his son with a snarl. Miriam had to crane his neck to see. Trailing a step behind, half hidden by his father's hulking frame, was a scowling lad, a couple of years older than Meya. He was the splitting image of his father, except for his split, bleeding lips and a swollen purplish bruise covering his right eye. "Really, Grogan, you want to chat about Grigor's knack of getting his arse stuffed by people half his size?" Diki called. The crowd roared with laughter. Gregor shot a dour glare at him, then at the back of his father's shiny head, shaking with both rage and embarrassment. "Quiet, Daki," Draken snapped. then turned to Meya. She had remained silent but seemed to be relishing the strife. Meya, what happened, lass? Wage fraud and undue violence, the warden piped in, having gleaned all he needed from his little roll of parchment. He tucked it back in his belt. Wench struck a deal with the other farmers. She had slipped the field she worked into their share. When they got their pay in the men's rate of 10 lats per field, they had paid her back 9 lats each, and kept 1 lat as fee. In case you couldn't count, that's twice the green eye rate. Draken massaged his forehead. The warden indicated the still suckling Gregor with a nod. Wench been at it for 3 whole moons. Brave young Gregor Cruelstaff here finally caught wind of it, told the landlord, got himself a nice roughing up for his trouble. Not before the snitch got his own share, he didn't. A familiar cold voice cut through Mia's. Miriam shot his daughter a silencing glare. She flicked him a fleeting glance, then sneered at Gregor, who was trembling in fury. He was in it from the start. Then he got greedy. Wants to double the fee. I said no, and he tattled. Saw him snivelling behind the landlord, and I just thought, if I'm going to get the pillory anyway, might as well earn it. Meya had barely finished when the crowd's furor swallowed her voice. There were loud curses from women bemoaning disgrace. Pebbles and mud balls resumed sailing through the air, with some insults thrown in. Chop ends off. That would stop you wreaking havoc for a bit before they grow back. Brodel, the butcher, brandished his blood-crusted knife. She tainted the wheat. What if there's another famine? A housewife wailed. You have outstayed your welcome in this town, devil. A fisherman snarled. Monster. A huntsman conquered, pointing with his bow, while his wife shrieked, my little boy would be here today if not for your famine, you demon spawn. Meya accepted their complaints in turn. Her expression remained vacant, yet her eyes were glistening. Draken cursed under his breath. Warden, this is preposterous. The eyes? The lass is 16. Fraud is hardly a heinous crime. He yelled over the hubbub, shielding his head with both arms. The warden grimaced, though that might have been in response to the juicy splat of half tomato now sliding down his cheek. My dear chap, do you think us so heartless? Winch asked for the eyes. What? Draken cried, eyes bulging, then whipped back to Meya. Are you out of your mind, lass? It's a warm day, Farmer Amerheim. Meya grinned, then winced as a gust of cool, dry wind lambasted the clearing. Growling in frustration, Draken sprang back to the warden. What will it take to free them early? 2 old silvers each, no haggling. The warden replied without a breath's pause, a gleeful smirk creeping up on his mouth. Grinding his teeth, Draken snatched his purse out of his pocket. He churned among the bronze for the greyish-white gleam of the silver 10-lat coin or the copper 5-lat, even as he knew he would find none, not the old ones. A roughened palm, holding 2 old silver faces, entered his sight line. Looking up, he saw Miriam's solemn brown eyes. Draken, take this, free your son. What about Meya? Miriam simply forced the coins into Draken's slack fingers. Take it, he's here because of her. I will leave when she leaves, Farmer Hild, Diki shouted. Miriam, her hand will rot, and that's if they don't get to her first, Draken shouted, a trembling finger jabbing towards the hysterical crowd. Yet Miriam did not waver. A dull thud sounded from behind them. The crowd fell quiet. Draken whipped around to find Meya laying flat on her back. Her hands had slid free of the ice pillory. After a merry quarter hour, a feat that should have been impossible, warm day or no, without breaking your thumbs or asking someone to chop off your arms to end the torture. Meya picked herself up, wiped her dripping hands on her dress, then dusted off the dirt as the crowd gaped in silence, hands clutching mud raised in mid throw. She turned to the warden. I'm free to go, I believe. The warden nodded, eyes darting back and forth from the still solid ice pillory and Mia's hand. Her freedom confirmed. Mia turned to Draken with a toothy grin. Like I said, it's a warm day. And that is it for the chapter 1. Hope you enjoyed this. Go ahead and like, comment, and